Yeah, just a few random ideas for tonight. Good, bad, batshit, insane, sane, whatever. A lot of hodgepodge stuff. But the Iowa governor, naturally a Republican, signed, her name is Kim Reynolds, and she signed gender, uh, let's call it what it is, a medical quackery care ban to protect minors from being abused by doctors and by idiot parents and whoever else is trying to influence them. And then also especially outlawing males from female spaces like bathrooms. And of course, the idiots on the queer theory left, the so-called woke left, they're howling like stuck pigs because they, their rights to get their dicks hard are being violated on the bathroom thing. Because the only reason males want in there is to perv, okay? Otherwise, you don't use them. So there was that. So that was good news. But of course, it's a red state, so it's kind of a wash. And then another good news for women is that a judge decided to halt or put a restraining order on the Wyoming abortion ban days after it took effect. And so it says, Teton County District Court Judge Melissa Owens' decision halts the ban amid a challenge in her court to a law that took effect Sunday. The Republican-controlled legislature approved the law despite earlier rulings by Owens that it had blocked a previous ban since shortly after it took effect last summer. The ban prohibits abortion at all stages of pregnancy except in cases of rape or incest that's reported to police or to save a woman's life. So, anyway, an amendment to the Wyoming Constitution says that adults have the right to make their own health care decisions. So the Republicans decided to skirt that by stating that abortion is not health care. Of course it's health care. And Owens said it's up to the courts, not lawmakers, to decide if that's the case. So anyway, the equality state has gone backward and has decided, or has tried, to violate women's equality to our society by reducing them to incubators. And then this was good. Old Sebastian Coe, Sir Sebastian Coe, heads this World Athletics, and he's decided, he and the organization have decided to ban male cheaters from women's sports. And he says no man who has gone through male puberty will be permitted to compete in female world ranking competitions from March 31st on. A working group will be set up to conduct further research into male cheater eligibility guidelines. We're not saying no forever, he said. But of course, Lord Coe said that the decision was guided by the overarching principle, which is to protect the female category. Decisions are always difficult when they involve conflicting needs. Well, there isn't any conflicting needs and rights. These dudes just want to cheat because they can't cut it with males. And there is no right to cheat. Find another line of work. And actually, anybody who has a Y chromosome should not be allowed to compete in women's sports, no matter what they're called, so-called intersex or DSD, as well as the little frauds that go around parading in woman face. I don't think they should even consult at all with these dudes. I don't think they should have anything. I think it should strictly be women, because the dudes will always win in the overwhelming majority of the cases. So there was that. And then some insanity in the United States. they were talking about endangered species, and this nitwit came along and decided, Lauren Boebert, I guess is her name, and she took photos of human fetuses, you know, which of course, when abortion takes place, in the overwhelming majority of cases, they're blobs. So, isn't this ridiculous, this nitwit? She says, I appreciate this time and thank you so much for everyone who's attending here and traveling so far to be here, Boebert began. I do want to say that before my opening remarks, you know, since we're talking about the Endangered Species Act, I'm just wondering if my colleagues on the other side would put babies on the endangered species list. Well, what a wacko. What a goddamn wacko. You wonder how the hell. And she almost got beat for re-election. But she's just fucking nutty. But she still got re-elected. Shouldn't even have been elected dog catcher. But so she just uses that as a way to get back at so-called extremist environmentalists. She's bought and paid for, probably. And which kind of alludes to this shit. I was reading this and I skimmed it, and because old Jane Elliott was talking about it, she's that educator that did the blue eye, brown eye experiment the day after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in 1968. She got a lot of criticism for it. She got a lot of praise for it. She was trying to prove the point about prejudice based on skin color. And anyway, she was mentioning, talking about Roe v. Wade being overturned last year, and she talked about how this book had an influence on the far right, especially those who were consulting former President Trump. And that book, The Birth Dearth, don't you just love that, the cutesy-wootsy title? But anyway, it's impossible to get this book. On Amazon, they're selling it for a couple of grand, $1,000. And so somebody was kind enough to put, I guess this is the original edition of the book, and actually photograph each page. So if you look on this video here, and I'll link all this stuff that I've talked about, you can actually read the book, enlarge the screen, and then pause it for each page and actually read it. And Ben Wattenberg was nothing but a hack, and he was miscalled a demographer. He really wasn't. He loved statistics, and of course you've heard the saying, lies, damn lies, and statistics, and he engaged in the statistic manipulation. And he wrote this book going back a little bit. He was born in 1933, and he died in 2015. So he was like 81 after surgery, and he had a long career talking about trends and statistics and all this crap as a hack for the American Enterprise Institute, which is a right-leaning, right-wing think tank, so-called, that's been around since 1938, and it's located in Washington. So Wattenberg was kind of the token moderate Democrat, and he would always talk about, how the Democrats needed to appeal to moderates, and how they need to look at cultural issues and blah, 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 blah. And he just kind of drove me crazy, the damn fool. And his sister is an actress, and gosh, why don't I look it up? Was her name? I want to just look it up before I shoot off my mouth. Rebecca Shull, who's still alive. I think she's 94 or something. Yeah, 94 years old. So that was his sister. So he had, so he had some famous, or fairly famous relatives. But anyway, old Wattenberg had a long career writing these tracts that were basically, they were bought and paid for by corporate interests. So he had this book, and because he was all upset that baby boomers, remember this is 1987 he's talking about, So the baby boomers were just coming into the fertility. The tail end of the baby boomers were hitting 40, or 40, 41. Not the tail end, the beginning, I should say. And the tail end of them were just coming into their 20s, early 20s. And they weren't having the babies like their parents were. So he had a big fit about it, and he wrote this 196-page book, and it's full of statistics and all this stuff, and how our Western societies, they're going to go into decline, steep decline, if the birth rates don't go up, and Japan's going to go into decline because the birth rates are down, and all these countries, these better countries, these white or Asian countries, superior Asian countries, they were all going to go into decline because the third world countries were producing more babies, and the communist countries like the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, they're gonna pose a problem, and we're not going to be able to fight the Cold War if we don't produce enough babies, and blah, 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 blah. I mean, this was 1987, so the USSR was still a thing. The Eastern Bloc countries were still a thing. All that. So he went into near hysteria over it. And he was talking about, how unhappy, childless, and never married people were. That, you can't just have one baby and be married, or two. 3 or 4 was optimal, and he had 4 altogether. 3 from the first marriage, and that wife died, and 1 from the second marriage. And he was old by the time the first wife died. He was already, he was in his 60s, I think, when that happened. So he was old when he had or adopted the child from the second marriage. But he thought 4 babies were 3 to 4 kids per woman was optimal for our country. And he just, he just trashed single people and all this, and trashed people without children, that they were going to regret it. And there's all this proof. Well, of course, there is no proof that they regret it. They don't regret it. That's the deal. Even back then, they didn't regret it. And of course, it's more so now. The birth rates are plummeting all over the world, except for a few African countries, a few scattered countries. The birth rates are plummeting because of better birth control, more education for women, more economic opportunities. And so the planet will be better off if people are not having so damn many kids and putting so much stress on the resources. But back 40 years ago, 35 years ago, when Wattenberg wrote his screed, he was so damn scared what was going to happen with the baby boom. Especially, and this is still somewhat valid about Social Security and Medicare, but, I question the projections there, too, about, the trust fund's going to run out of money, blah, blah, blah. Was a lot of political shit starting from the early 1980s to undermine the younger people against the older people by saying it's not going to be there for them. We had to hear that as baby boomers. We had to hear that shit. When we were in our 20s and even in our teens, we heard that shit. And that was Cato Institute, peddled that crap. So, anyway, that's the only thing, the only argument about having more kids is to help have enough workers to support the elderly. But he has a little illustration there with a python, and so he talks about the baby boom generation being this bulge in this python, and as they get older, this python is working through the body. But of course it's shitting out. The python is shitting out because a fairly large proportion of the baby boomers are already dead. At least, I don't want to say the ballpark figure of how many have since died. But then eventually, that python's going to shit out all the baby boom. And eventually, everything balances out. But he was all worried about that. he was all worried about the military. You know, I already mentioned that, whether our preparedness, our national security is at risk. It was all a bunch of shit. And then his proposals, he was trying to kind of talk out of both sides of his mouth, and he was good at that. That he wanted to appeal to the anti-abortion crowd, you know, by peddling adoption. That if fewer women had abortions, especially the white women, let's face it, it's the white women, even 5% of those pregnancies that were aborted and the women went through with it, that would help the birth dearth thing. It would help with the population. So he tried talking out of his mouth there, and then he mentioned a lot of possibilities, like more job sharing, you know, the old stuff that some feminists were pushing, most feminists were pushing, and flex time and blah, 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 blah. None of that really came to fruition. It was a lot of pie in the sky, and it never really did it, because things haven't really changed that much. A little bit. Mostly public sector stuff, but where it was more amenable. And of course, at the same time, millions of jobs were being sent overseas, but he doesn't mention that. I don't think he mentions that much at all, because he was still talking about India and China still being economically backward. So how things have changed in 40 years, right? Thanks to the good old USA. And all this. So he was peddling that. Then he wanted to see more tax incentives for larger families. He wanted to see that. And the thing that really offended the piss out of me was his advocating reducing Social Security benefits for childless married couples and never marrieds to support those who have kids, who have 3 or 4. And I'm thinking, you stupid shit. Who do you think's the poorest people in old age? It's the never married women. And why are you trying to push women into prostituting themselves into marriage, or push that down people's throats? So I thought, you stupid shit. But of course that went nowhere. None of that stuff went anywhere. And Jane Elliott called him brilliant. He wasn't brilliant. He was just a little weasel who loved to try to play both sides, but at heart he was a neocon, and even well, I wouldn't call him a neolib, a neocon on foreign policy and shit like that. But his book was, yeah, it was very racist in the undercurrent, but it was also very xenophobic and downright sexist, because he blamed the upper middle class and professional women, white women, for not having enough babies. And that's what the culprit was. And that's why he proposed all this pro-natalist stuff, which went absolutely nowhere. It's gone nowhere. And this was not going to be a pendulum swing, because the baby boom was a fluke from the Second World War, thanks in large part to government policies, tax policies and the like, which centered reproducing and marriage. But it was aberrant. It was totally aberrant. And he wanted to bring all that back to just because he was panicky about the non-whites and the non-whites, especially like the Latinos and the blacks and black people, and also immigrants. He was all freaking about. But the thing that really was important about this book is that it helped, I think, and as Jane Elliott noted, it helped influence politicians now that are peddling nonsense. And especially this, oh shit, what is it called? Oh God, the Great Reset, or whatever it's called. And I know I'm using the wrong words. Where it's a conspiracy theory about keeping the population down, and, you know, the replacement theory. That's what I mean, the Great Replacement, and how they would bring in all these immigrants. And say, it's all a bunch of horse shit anyway. And I've already gone over 20 minutes. So I wanted to note this, that this book is, you can read it. You can't get it anywhere on PDF unless you pay for it. And it's just a stupid book. And unfortunately too influential on people who should know better. And so that whole book is on this YouTube channel. Anyway, on this video. And then I finally wanted to note this hilarious story, but of course I'm not going to play the video because of copyright. And there's a lot of videos out there about the biggest idiot politician in Australia, whose name is Lydia Thorpe, and she tried to shut down Kelly J. Keane and Standing for Women when they spoke in Canberra, Australia, across from Parliament. And she made an absolute jackass out of herself. She was ridiculed by the media down there. And of course, she fell down or tripped or whatever and was crawling, I mean, on her fours, crawling on the grass, and finally stood up. You don't wear fucking heels anyway if you're going to do this stuff. And then finally drags the Aboriginal flag, desecrates that while walking away, and she's whining about how bad Kelly J. Keane is, and all this for daring to say what women are and protecting women's rights and women's spaces. And I think they said it was something like 50 people were there to speak, and well, there was like 400 cross-dressers and transvestites and their supporters a short distance away trying to drown them out. Of course, it didn't work. And Lydia Thorpe just made herself into the AOC of Australia. And in fact, she's probably dumber than AOC, which is saying quite a bit. And then Kelly J. Keane and will be holding some speak outs in New Zealand. So I guess they've decided they'll let her in. And so hopefully that goes better than this thing. But I laughed my ass off when I saw these videos of that member of Parliament. Can you believe it? Making a fool out of herself? Oh, God. Anyway, I think that's going to be it. This is my longest video yet, so I've got to shut it all off. Goodbye.